Hello, class. My speech is on the inequality of wealth. Um, so in LA, we see lots of inequality of wealth. We see it driving down every street. We have places such as Skid Row that have some of the highest poverty rates around. Uh, like I said, in Los Angeles too, we see luxury cars, luxury vehicles, BMWs, drive right next to people who struggle, who can't afford food, people that can't have afford basic needs that we take for granted, like clothes, like shoes. And most of us want these luxury things, and there's nothing wrong with that. I personally want nice things as well, but the focus of these things is ultimately detrimental because we draw away from the truth. The truth is that 40% of Americans can't afford an unexpected $400 bill. And that's a wake up call because $400 may not seem a lot of money to me and you, but $400 is ultimately like a life changing amount of money to a lot of people. Um, and this constant focus of wealth will ultimately be the death of society because those people who have less, who people we consider not to be of the same status, will ultimately get left behind. And we see that now during the pandemic, that people who don't have the same means and same opportunities are ultimately suffering the worst. And this wage gap has been something that has been long happening in America. It's been growing for a very long time. In 2018, Christopher Ingram wrote in the Washington Post, the richest one in an article titled "The Richest 1% Now Owns More of the Country's Wealth Than Any Time in the Past 50 Years," and that's shocking. And in that too, he further expands on this, and he says that 1%, the wealthiest 1% own 40% of the wealth in America. 1% owns almost half of the wealth in America, leaving tons of people like me and you, far behind. Leaving people that don't have the same means in a vulnerable state. Um, and these people who are wealthy are not in a vulnerable state, but they just keep getting more secure and they keep getting more on top. This is a chart during the crisis of revenue growth during the pandemic, and people like Jeff Bezos, people like Bill Gates, people like Mark Zuckerberg have all gotten richer during a time like this. And that seems odd because most of us know that, or know many people that are struggling, people that can't uh, make certain ends meet, people have certain uh, certain issues that can't be fixed, and this too can be traced to the government too because they don't provide certain help and certain measures that they should. In 2020, the Journal of Economic Perspectives mentioned that in the rise of income and wealth inequality of America, that the 400 wealthiest Americans paid a lower uh, average tax than the average of 29%. And that doesn't make any sense. People who make more should be paying more money for social safety nets. So at a time like this, people actually have something to fall back on. And this COVID crisis has only brought out the cruelties that this wage gap can bring. Um, the wage gap, not only the wage gap, the wealth gap, excuse me, the wealth gap, uh, can be seen during this COVID-19 crisis as people who have small businesses, people, the dreamers, people who are chasing the American dream, ultimately got destroyed by this time, ultimately couldn't recover. People now are out of business and they can't they can't return. And while big businesses did feel that, if you look at the stock market right here, there was a dip, but ultimately everything recovered and all the big companies are now at all-time highs. And the COVID crisis ultimately profited the big businesses, but people who have underlying conditions, people in underserved communities and and people of color are ultimately left behind and left to suffer during a time like this. And if the wealth gap is closed and people have more opportunities, people can gain traction, gain control of their lives, and actually have money to support themselves, support their health, and support their families. So now that we know about this huge, wealth gap in America, how do we combat this? You know, how do we fight against this? How do we avoid when a disaster hits that 15% of Americans are unemployed? How do we manage to keep everybody happy, safe, healthy, and keep them in a home? And one of the first steps, I believe, and it's mentioned by Professor Hoyt in 2018 in Wealth Inequality and Activism, is that we need to recognize the wealth inequality. We need to recognize that it's there, that it exists, that it extends from social injustice, it extends from racial injustice, and it's a long lasting issue. And how we need to fund these communities and how we need to put money in these communities to educate and so that they can better their own situations and really help themselves. And for a more short-term solution and that's a long-term solution, but a short-term solution for this COVID crisis would be obviously a stimulus and a progressive tax to help those who, or to tax those who have made more, and to help those social safety nets, as I said, to help those who cannot help themselves. Because the issue is real. And if we continue like this path, people will be forgotten, left behind, and more deaths will occur, not just at this crisis, but at the next crisis and the crisis and so on. So we must avoid and close this wage gap or wealth gap so that people can help themselves and truly create something for themselves. Because the wage gap is real, the disparity is real, and people really are dying from this lack of help and this lack of money and this lack of involvement from all of us as a society and a government. It is important that we don't forget that these people in poverty need help, and it's important that we serve them just like we would serve anybody else. We give them the same attention as the wealthy people, so that ultimately we all can come together and beat and beat a crisis like this. Because ultimately, if we're all coming together and everyone is at an equal playing field and has equal opportunities, a situation like this can be overcome